Hello everyone, this is part 28 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist. To see more, comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto stared helplessly across to Fu, firmly in the hands of Itachi, who didn't seem to be letting go anytime soon. He shook with frustration. There was nothing he could do for her, not with two powerful S-ranked shinobi in the way, both of which were beyond his abilities. He controlled himself, although his balled-up fists were still shaking slightly with anger as he turned around to face Kisum. The shark-like man grinned right at him, basking in the sheer anger and hopelessness of his opponent before him. Thanks, kid, you have no idea how annoying it's been to track down the Nanabe there. But what do you know, we come to check up on you and guess what? She's right there. He smiled his toothy grin, the pointed teeth that made up all the swordsman's mouth glinting in the sunlight. Naruto felt so furious and helpless, he knew no help would be coming for them. They were in a training ground after all, any signs of a fight would be passed off as a spar. If you hurt you'll. I'll. Kisum's smile slowly became a low smirk as he lifted Samehada up off the ground from where he was resting on it. With a flick of his wrist, the great sword burst from its wrappings, the entire length of the spiky blade revealed to the open skies. Or you'll what, brat? Naruto's fists were so tightly clenched he began to feel blood drip from where his hidden claws dug into his palm, the wounds healing almost as quickly as they were made. With a deep breath to calm himself, he moved a hand to rest over his thigh before he channeled chakra into the seal he had placed there, one of the earliest in his career. There was a burst of smoke, and when it cleared, Naruto stood firmly, holding onto the massive length of Kubikiriboko, the sever sword of Zabuza Momoki. Kisum narrowed his eyes at the sight of the massive butcher knife before an even more malicious smile spread across his features. I had heard Zabuza died a while back. Kiri's been searching for that sword high and low, Kiba too. You got them in there as well. He said it with a smirk, but when Naruto just shrugged, his eyes narrowed even further. I may have abandoned the swordsmen the day I betrayed Kirigakure, but for you to be holding that sword is a disgrace. I'll make sure you lose both hands for even thinking of touching it. Kisum chose that moment to charge at blinding speeds towards the blonde. Samehada brought back around him for a sweeping blow that Naruto only narrowly blocked by bringing the enormous sword around. It was heavy, weighing at least 80 pounds, but Naruto had gone through a lot of strength training and it felt no heavier than a normal katana to him. However, he was no kenjutsu master. Swinging Kiba around while facing a taijutsu or even ninjutsu-based opponent was one thing. Holding one of the blades of the seven swordsmen certainly did not make him one, a fact Kisum decided to drill that lesson painfully into Naruto with each crippling blow he dealt. Using his inherent speed and strength, Naruto was able to block or dodge well enough, making sure that Samehada never touched his skin even once. However, the difference in ability between the two was staggering. Whereas Naruto was just barely bringing the massive blade around in time, Kisum was practically dancing around any pitiful attempts at a counterattack he made. Finally, Kisum grew slightly irritated and using a powerful blow he pushed Samehada right through Kubikiriboko, dicing the center of the blade into many pieces. Despite having just destroyed one of its brothers, the sharkskin sword was smiling insanely, tasting the air of battle and breathing in the delicious scent of Naruto's chakra so close by. Kisum had no intention of disappointing his sword and brought his blade around again before Naruto even realized his was broken. Acting on battle-honed instincts alone, Naruto kicked off the ground, pushing himself up over the toothy blade even as he released his grip on Zabuza's former sword. Kisum wasn't so easily dodged though, and before he even finished his swing he delivered a powerful and debilitating kick into Naruto's midsection. Naruto, unable to ground himself and defend against the attack, was launched across the training ground, creating a small trench through the earth as he landed. Kisum smiled as Naruto staggered to his feet, wiping the dirt he had collected off of his coat. He shrugged off the large red coat. It would hinder him more than help him in this fight, so that he was left in just his burnt orange shirt and mesh undershirt. Before he let the weighted jacket fall to the ground, he unsealed the only thing he would need out of it for now, Hiden's large tri-bladed staff. In their fight he had found no way to break it. For now he hoped that would be true for Kisum as well. It was much lighter than Kubikiriboko, so Naruto could swing it a bit more easily, which he was counting on. With a burst of speed that would be impossible with the sever sword, he shot forward, almost surprising the larger, heavier man. However, Kisum had one thing that no amount of training or natural ability could give you: experience. He easily brought up his sword to defend from the attack Naruto brought from his rear before swinging it around in an almost lazy arc to cut off yet another crazed, but fast blow. Naruto had no real style with the weapon. Almost like hidden, he just swung it with a righteous fury, relentless in his fast and powerful attacks. However, there was a reason Kisum was the top-seat swordsman of the Mist once. It meant he was one of the best kenjutsu users in the elemental nations. No amount of sloppy blows could breach his well-covered guard, no matter how surprisingly fast. You couldn't even see Naruto, he was moving so quickly, delivering multiple blows to Samehada in seconds. The sword actually began to grow annoyed. Kisum did as well when he realized Samehada was unable to break the irritating weapon for some reason. Naruto quickly backed away though. He realized what he was doing was hopeless and foolhardy. Kisum was too good at kenjutsu, and this was using more energy that Kisum needed to defend. No war of attrition could be won here, not against a man with the chakra reserves Kisum possessed. Naruto backed off, sealing away the scythe for now as he reconsidered his options. He sighed before he unsealed as many of his kunai as he could hold before scattering them across the battlefield. Despite the fearsome and powerful technique he had just unveiled, Kisum looked nothing more than amused. Hoping to catch me by surprise with the Horatian brat. Sorry to disappoint, but thanks to your stunt with Toby we all know about that little move. Naruto cursed. He hoped the element of surprise would at least be with him. Before he could capitalize on anything, Kisum raised a hand to his mouth in a seal that Naruto knew from his file. Water style, exploding water colliding wave. Kisum spat out thousands of gallons of water, flooding the battlefield, putting him right in his element even as the jutsu washed away the kunai Naruto had scattered, rendering his technique null. Naruto cursed again, louder this time as Kisum smirked. Quickly he empowered his legs with chakra before jumping up and over the monstrous wave of water, landing on its surface skillfully. Kisum looked like he had another taunt, but as a veteran shinobi he knew when to take advantages and quickly pressed his hand against the water. Water style, 5 feeding sharks. 5 sharks comprised of Kisum's chakra materialized under the water, glowing a pale blue as they shot through the newly formed lake. Naruto had to dive to the side as one of them shot up and out of the water, its jaws aiming for his arm. That pushed him right into the path of another, which forced him to spring back on his hands, avoiding losing his leg this time. He dashed across the surface of the water, but as fast as he could run, the sharks could keep up, just below the flowing waters. One leapt up from the water behind him and he swiveled to punch it squarely in the nose. However, it simply dissolved before reforming again, right back underwater as it took to pursuing him like the others. Naruto narrowed his eyes even as he ran, the metaphorical cogs in his brain turning like crazy even as he whipped out a large scroll from nowhere, furiously scribbling as he ran. Kisum only laughed as he increased the chakra flow into his jutsu, making the sharks speed up considerably. At the edge of the newly formed lake, Itachi watched on impassively, holding the still struggling Fu steady as he tried to see what it was Naruto was doing. Finally he was finished and altered his course, using a shark that had leapt out of the water as a stepping stone to flip himself out of the water. In midair he created a clone before throwing him the scroll. Both landed back on the surface, splitting off in different directions. Immediately the first Naruto charged up a Rasengan in his hand, reminding himself to finish the training so that he could do it without clutching his wrist. Kisum once again smirked as he finally released the shark jutsu, standing up again as he grabbed Samehada off his back. Swirling chakra vortex met sentient sword as an awful grinding sound could be heard. Unfortunately the Rasengan didn't do much before the spiny sword drank it in, growing larger as it did so. Kisum could only grin as he thrust his blade forward, intent on raking the blonde's chest apart, only to see the Naruto in front of him burst into smoke. He whirled, expecting an attack that never came. However, when he looked around for the real Naruto he couldn't see him, at least until he spotted the bubbles pop on the surface of the water. He looked down to see Naruto furiously swimming downwards, scroll in his mouth as he kicked and thrashed furiously to increase his pace. The kid's a moron, he actually went underwater. Without wasting much time, Kisum bent down again and placed his hand against the surface, quickly reforming the sharks again. The skull chased after Naruto as he swam lower and lower into the water, his bubbles of breath becoming fewer and further between. As it was, he hadn't left himself enough time to actually swim back out again before he would pass out. With the chakra constructs right behind him, he gave one last oxygen-deprived kick before his hand touched the floor. Quickly he unsealed the scroll and pressed it firmly into the floor before passing chakra through it. His vision was blurring from the lack of air, but his eyes crinkled into a smirk as the water around the scroll began to warp and swirl. He watched through closing eyes as the entirety of the lake began to drain into the special sealing scroll he had made, sharks included. Soon he was allowed to flop to the floor on a very soggy training ground as Kisum simply seethed, not liking that he had lost his element in this fight. What the hell did you do, brat? Naruto weakly got to his feet, drinking in the air like it was sake and he could get drunk. He chuckled, regaining his strength slowly as his muscles began to receive oxygen again, the damage done being quickly repaired. I made a sealing scroll, made it extra big and removed the restrictions for sealing one object at a time. I call it the plug hole seal. He laughed weakly at the joke before being thrown across the field by Kisum's punch. He impacted into a tree before woozily getting to his feet. He just managed to flit to a nearby kunai that hadn't been washed too far away before Kisum could repeat the movement with his sword. He was just so outclassed in this fight it wasn't even funny. He could only watch as Kisum came barreling down on him, sword up and at the ready to rip a limb off. What he wasn't expecting was for the sword to suddenly impact with a massive wall of sand, quickly intercepting the blow. Same had still sunk through, but it was slowed long enough for a set of arms to wrap around Naruto before taking off with him. He was set down on the branch of a nearby tree only so that he could look up at the softly smiling face of Gaara. Without saying a word, his friend stood up and disappeared down to the field in a swirl of sand, standing before Kisum fearlessly. Hey, I remember you, sand brat. Same had it as too, and he's been waiting so long for another taste of your chakra. Gaara remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest as they always were unless necessity called for him to move. He knew this would be a hard fight, but the man before him had hurt Naruto. Gaara would not let that stand. Itachi, you maybe wanna hop in here. Deal with the Kyuubi maybe. The Sharingan user coldly turned to the shark-like man, his eyes spinning impassively. I believe I will let you handle this, Kisum. Is this not the fight you have been talking about for over 2 years now? Kisum narrowed his eyes at his so-called partner. He was just scared after what the Kyuubi had done to him last time. Grimacing, he turned back to Gaara, the stoic sand user still not having moved in this time. I hope you have something new for me this time, kid. If I remember right, your ultimate defense didn't like Samehada's bite all that much. If he was hoping for a reaction from the young Kazekage, he was disappointed, as it was he simply raised his sword and charged the boy. Like he predicted, the swing was met by sand, and like he also predicted, the chakra holding the sand together was quickly absorbed, letting it fall uselessly to the ground. I hope you have better than that, kid. At this rate you're not going to have enough sand left to cover a senbon. Gaara's eyes narrowed slightly as his arms became unfolded, an action not many people had lived to see in a fight with him. I am Gaara no Subaku, God I'm Kazekage of Sunagakur. The sands are my home and my protector, where I go, the desert follows. And like that, an enormous explosion of sand erupted from Gaara's body as the many seals that littered his body poured out the contents. The clearing was very quickly transformed into a miniature desert, much in the same way as Kisum's own jutsu had shifted the environment in his favor before. However, this was slightly different as all of this sand was infused with Gaara's chakra, not just the usual amount in his gourd. Seals are rather useful, are they not? Kisum scowled as a tentacle of sand burst up from under him, attempting to wrap around his neck and choke him. It was swiftly cut down, but not before 3 more took its place like the mythical Hydra. On all sides, Kisum was forced to dodge and block as arm-like whips of sand threatened to dice him apart or push him under where he could be crushed. Gaara had returned his arms to their natural place as he directed the sand with nothing but thoughts, transmitting his very will through every grain that was still connected to him by chakra. Kisum was actually finding himself quite hard-pressed all of a sudden, despite his sword devouring the chakra in the sand. It still maintained its momentum when it struck. He was lucky that the sand was relatively light, or the blows might have begun to get serious. Of course, he only jinxed himself with that thought. Immediately the ground around him erupted on itself as yellow was replaced by deadly black. Realizing the danger he was in, he flung himself back before the prison of iron sand collapsed on where he had been standing. Gaara now stood with his hand outstretched, having to exert himself more to manipulate the complex magnetic fields around the iron sand he attempted to control. Far from his fight with Sasori, his skill at manipulating the deadly black cloud had increased dramatically as he dedicated the past months to training in it and it alone. While he still had to strain slightly, the cost on his chakra was reduced and his ability to control the sand had dramatically increased, especially considering he wasn't fighting against another magnet release user. He wasted no time in turning the newly mobile iron sand around and assaulting Kisum with it, the attacks now coming in with much more force than before as he heard them screech against the blade. With one hand he manipulated the deadly black cloud while the other hung to his side, only slightly twitching back and forth in what could be described as minute hand movements. Kisum was growing increasingly aggravated, throwing his sword around more wildly to end the sand that tried to crash into him. It was like he was fighting against the third Kazekage himself, only as a Jinchuriki that also could control the sands to defend himself. Kisum grew tired of being put on the defensive, but when he tried to create a seal-less water clone he found there to be no available water to use. Gaara's impromptu desert sucked all the moisture from the air. Even now Kisum felt the dry heat begin to affect him while Gaara remained unchanged. The attacks continued relentlessly from all sides, most of the time from multiple directions at once. For the first time in a long time Kisum found himself genuinely exerting himself in a fight, one that he was actually finding difficult. His face set into a grim and determined mask, one that had only ever adorned his face in his old spars with his fellow swordsmen. His cocky attitude was gone as his feet naturally assumed a stance that he hadn't used in years, although he still trained it to perfection. Suddenly the swings of his sword grew faster, more controlled, and not a single grain of sand, iron or not, came within 3 feet of him. His eyes narrowed as he continued to defend against the relentless assault, actually seething with anger at having to resume his old style. He began moving forward, still blocking or cutting down any and all attacks that came near him while picking up speed. The sand at his feet tried to wrap around him, but he either swung his blade down to get rid of it or applied chakra to his feet to quickly jump out of the way. Gaara still hadn't moved for the entirety of the fight and didn't look like he was even going to attempt to dodge the attack that was now coming for him. Kisum slashed his blade down one more time, cutting right through the automatic defense as if it weren't even there. Finally he allowed a smirk to grace his lips as his teeth set back into a toothy grin, only to vanish as he felt a stinging sensation through his back. The Kazekage in front of him disintegrated, slowly as to mock him even further for his critical error. He turned with a snarl only to receive a similar sting on his chest, the blow coming faster than he could follow it. He looked down, surprised to find a large gash across the front of his robes, slowly leaking blood in large rivulets. He blinked a few times before looking across at Gaara, still in that same pose, staring impassively. Gold dust, 1,000 phantom blades. He saw a flash of gold and felt his grip on his sword loosen. He looked down to see a similar slash now adorning his arm, before he received yet another to his leg. Quickly his entire body was littered with tiny, inconsequential cuts that alone he could have completely ignored. However, now the blood ran down every part of his body, weakening him as he dropped to a knee, his muscles sluggish and unresponsive. He felt same had a shift in his hand, but already he couldn't properly close his hand around the mighty blade. The sharkskin sword dropped to the sand, which Gaara made sure was free of his chakra so that it wouldn't grow any more powerful. Kisum tried to struggle to his feet, but the gold dust hadn't stopped yet. The fine powder, moving so fast that it was nothing more than a flash of light, cut his body to shreds. Breathing became difficult as his vision began to swim. His mind was refusing to give up until the end, but it had lost all power over his body. His hand twitched as he made a last-ditch attempt to reach for his sword, currently the only thing that could save him. Samehada. He was only met with another flash of gold before he knew darkness. Gaara watched that mighty swordsman drop to the sand, lifeless and immobile. He wasn't the only one watching. Samehada cried out in sorrow for its fallen master, its wail reaching the ears of everybody nearby. Gaara looked around, surprised that Itachi had done nothing to help his dying companion, looked at him across the desert he had created. Naruto dropped down to his side out of nowhere, looked better but not fully recovered. He bent down, sliding Kisum's ring from his ringer before sliding it onto his left hand before looking across at Itachi. In a flurry of crows the black-haired man appeared in front of them, a knocked-out Fu dangling over his shoulder like a sack of vegetables. Naruto just snarled at him, hoping he still had enough in him to help Gaara take the man down, knowing he wouldn't be foolish enough to try a Tsukuyomi on him again. Give Fu back. To their shock the young Uchiha prodigy simply nodded, dropping the mint-haired girl down to the sands. They rose up to meet her before carrying her over to where Gaara and Naruto were standing. Naruto narrowed his eyes, wondering what Itachi was planning as he searched the man's face for deceit, staying away from his eyes. He watched as he rose up, one hand making both boys tense in anticipation of an attack. However, the man only slipped off the ring on his finger before gently setting it on the ground. The end of the Akatsuki is coming soon. I would prefer to be alive to see it. It is not your place to kill me, as that right belongs to my brother and him alone. Only he can cleanse my soul of the many atrocities I have committed. After this day we shall never see one another again. Do not come looking for me. And without anything more needed to be said, he disappeared as his body dissolved into a murder of crows, each taking off in a different direction. Naruto stood still for another few moments, expecting the surprise attack that never came. Itachi was true to his word and had vanished completely. After a few more moments of hesitation, Naruto crept over to the ring and picked it up, not sure what to expect. He turned the red ring around in his hands. It reflected the light in the sun for a moment before he slipped it next to Kisam's. Only 4 of his fingers remained empty, 4 more Akatsuki to kill. He turned to Gaara with a confused expression and the sand wielder merely shrugged. Sighing because he didn't understand what was going on, he walked over to where Fu lay peacefully on the sand. He checked her over for any sign of injury, but it seemed Itachi had knocked her out with a powerful genjutsu, knowing Chomeshi would be waking in only a few minutes. He stood up, walking over to Kisam's body again before calmly examining the man. His eye was drawn to the immense sword that had fallen to his side. He reached down to pick it up by the hilt only to pull his hand back before spikes could impale his palm. He looked down at the sword curiously, even as he could feel it snarling at him in anger. He sighed before went about sealing the sword away, for once he would return the blade to Kiri, knowing that he would never be able to wield it. He looked around the battlefield one last time before Gaara returned the sands to his body, making sure to grab the remains of Kubikiriboko and hauling Fu into his arms. Can't get a normal day, can we? Naruto and Gaara made their way through the streets of Konoha, now slowly emptying of people as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Worryingly, Fu had not woken from her position in Naruto's arms, but she stirred ever so often, so he assumed she was merely asleep. He would let her sleep for now, but first thing in the morning he would be checking to make sure Itachi didn't do anything to her. He returned his attention to the street they were walking down, absently noting the few stalls and vendors closing down for the night before he turned his head to face his friend. How did you find us, and how did you know we were in trouble? Gaara cracked a small smile as he continued to walk on down the street, not breaking stride for a moment. It was getting too quiet. That meant you were either with Tayuya or in trouble. Seeing as Tayuya was with my wife, I made the next logical assumption. He smirked again, even as Naruto pouted at the way he said it. As for finding you, don't think that you are the only one of us who keeps a tabs on their friends. He motioned to the general area of the seal Naruto had placed on him unknowingly before plucking a single grain of sand off of Naruto's coat with a smile. I'm not always in trouble. Gaara just stared at him in bemusement. Not when you have your friends to get you out of it, no. Naruto pouted again, but it quickly dissolved into a tired smile. His body still ached from trying to fight Kisame and his lungs burned from oxygen deprivation despite all Kurama was doing to heal them. So what do we do now? Akatsuki is down to 4 members, Tobi, Zetsu, Konan, and Pion. Should we try and go after them? Gaara seemed thoughtful even though his expression didn't change. Naruto had learned how to read the subtle movements in his friend's eyes that told him more than any words could express. No, they are weakened right now. At best they will draw back to recuperate and lick their wounds, at worst they will attempt something foolish and draw attention to themselves. That either gives us time or an opportunity, both of which are welcome. We will continue to do as we have been doing, waiting, training, and preparing. Sooner or later they will have to come to us. Naruto nodded grimly. He didn't really like the idea of just letting Akatsuki recover, but really there wasn't all that much they could do about it. Beyond physical descriptions and somewhat limited knowledge of their abilities, both non-existent in the case of Pion and apparently Tobi now, they still knew next to nothing about the organization itself. They did not know its origins, its purpose, or even where they were based, all of which could become critical information in the future. For now all they really could do was wait for them to try something and retaliate in turn. When they reached the hotel, he gently laid Fu down in her bed, smiling as he pulled the covers up over her sleeping form. He knew that she loved sleeping next to him, but with Tayuya back in his life, he knew the girl he loved took priority, even if they were both the two most precious people to him. He crept out of the room silently before walking across the corridor to his own room, having already said goodnight to Gaara on the way in. He snuck in, noting that the curtains were all drawn and the scent of dinner was slowly fading, which meant Tayuya had been in. He peered around the doorway to the bedroom, and sure enough, she was sitting on the bed, reading through a scroll. She enjoyed looking through various sheet music in her alone time, however, like Fuinjutsu to her, Naruto couldn't make sense of any of the seemingly random scribbles that danced across the pages on the strange bar-like lines. It didn't take her long to spot Naruto's rather obvious blonde hair poking around the door, and she quickly set the scroll away. "Hey shithead, how was your day with little Minty?" Naruto chuckled at the nickname as he walked further into the room, setting himself down on the bed next to her as she naturally snuggled up into his side. "Eventful." She quirked an eyebrow before she noticed the new rings now adorning his previously empty left hand. Her eyes began to worry, but Naruto was obviously safe, and if something had happened to Fu, he wouldn't be managing a smile right now. Suddenly a pout made itself known on her lips as she crossed her arms over her chest in a huff. "You got another 2 Akatsuki, didn't you?" Naruto also raised an eyebrow, chuckling again at her tone. "You make that sound like it's a bad thing." Tayuya just grumbled to herself even as she pulled herself closer to the warm blonde next to her. "You have all the fun. I only got one of them and I had to share him with 2 other girls." Naruto was actually attempting to hold back his laughter. Just the fact that Tayuya could be petulant that she didn't get to face an incredibly dangerous enemy warmed him. He pulled her closer into his arms as they both began to slide down the headboard, getting into a more comfortable position on the bed. "Fine then, I promise that the next one we face I'll leave to you." Tayuya just smiled happily before planting a surprising kiss on Naruto's lips and falling back into her previous position. "Good." Naruto just smiled warmly before he let the exhaustion from the day finally catch up to him, quickly sending him into a light, but peaceful sleep. For once there was rather lively conversation as the small group hopped through the trees, taking it rather slow compared with the speeds they were able to move. Fu and Tayuya were chatting towards the back of the group, talking about inane things that they couldn't really discuss with Naruto. Gaara led the group, remaining quiet as a few things swirled around his mind, just waiting for his focus. Naruto bounced over the tree branches next to Matsuri, wanting to know more about her, seeing as they hadn't really spoke all that much since he came back. "So how come you weren't on a genin team?" Naruto had been curious about this. He knew Matsuri was still a genin, so he wondered where her team was. "Before we got engaged I was Gaara's apprentice. He picked me, or rather I picked him, straight from the academy. Usually that only happens to the best ninja in the academy. I still don't know why he took me on." Naruto just smiled. He could sense some insecurity from the girl. Maybe he just saw something in you, potential that he just needed to coax out. Matsuri offered a kind smile in return, but it was obvious she doubted her own words. "Maybe, but 2 years later and I'm still a genin." She chuckled to herself as she looked ahead at Gaara, who was lost in thought. How ironic, right? A genin engaged to the Kazekage. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder even as they continued to hop. "Have you taken the Chunin exams?" Matsuri shook her head slowly. "Because I'm not in a team I haven't been eligible for the ones in Konoha. The one in Kumo was right after my graduation and the one in Iwa we can't go to because of our alliance with Konoha." Naruto nodded in understanding. "This year is sooner, right?" Matsuri nodded. "Then I'm sure you'll breeze past them, make Gaara proud." Matsuri offered another weak smile. "And if you need training and I'm around, just ask and I'd be happy to help." Matsuri nodded and Naruto let up on his questions. He was beginning to sound like an interrogator. He let her leap ahead to where Gaara was, letting the 2 fiancés have some time together after everything that had happened in the leaf. The sight of them together got him thinking as he glanced back at Tayuya, wondering if they would be ready for something like that. They loved each other. Naruto would die to protect her. He didn't really see any reason he couldn't propose, but even so, it still felt too early. With everything that had been happening since he got back, they hadn't had much time together. They hadn't even really been on a single real date in their entire relationship, nothing that would count anyway. He chuckled, now knowing what he would be doing when he got back to the village. Naruto turned to look at his redhead girlfriend again, but managed to catch a flash of orange and black out of the periphery of his vision. Hold up. He put up a hand that told everybody to stop on the branch they had been standing on as Naruto quickly looked in the direction he had seen the blur. He peered closer but couldn't see anything. He tried to sniff them out but all he got were the general smells of the forest. Leaping over to where he thought he saw, whatever it was, he still couldn't see anything, at least no tracks or telltale signs that anybody had been following them. Tayuya jumped over to where he was, landing quietly as she too peered out into the darkening forest. What did you see? Naruto narrowed his eyes but even as they flashed red for a moment he couldn't see anything at all. Nothing, it was nothing. Come on, it's getting dark, we should try to cover more ground before setting up camp. Tayuya nodded uncertainly, looking at Naruto oddly as he returned to the branch he had been standing on previously before the group set off again. They continued on as they had previously, with somewhat animated conversation and a few laughs as Tayuya or Matsuri would make a funny observation. Naruto, however, was uncharacteristically quiet. Every so often he would catch another glimpse of that strange orange and black blur, only for it to vanish if he turned to look at it. He knew he should have probably told the rest of the group but he couldn't shake the feeling something was off about it. His eye was sharp, his nose even more so. If someone was trailing them he would be able to smell them. Nothing was hidden from his nose. It made him consider the fact he might be under a genjutsu of some sort. It would have to be a powerful one to get past Kurama's notice. Not wanting to alert their pursuer if it was a genjutsu, he decided not to flare his chakra. Instead he allowed just a trace amount of Kyuubi's chakra into his system. He had found out a while ago that to break most genjutsu he only had to disrupt his chakra network, which is what injuring yourself or sending a pulse through your system would normally do. However, his way was less noticeable, was more effective and didn't involve sticking himself in the leg with a kunai, which was a plus. However, this had no noticeable effects on his surrounding, bar a few of the more chakra-sensitive creatures scampering away from him. He narrowed his eyes as he continued on, for once actually hoping he was seeing things. Unfortunately he knew that couldn't be true as he caught the blur again. However, this time he reacted as fast as he could, launching a kunai towards it without even fully looking. When he did turn, all he saw was his kunai embedded into the wood of a tree. The whole group stopped when they heard the dull thud of a kunai, all of them going on high alert until they saw it was Naruto who had thrown it. He moved over to pull the kunai out of the tree and narrowed his eye as he noted there wasn't any hint it had hit anything but the tree. He wasn't one to brag, but his aim was impeccable and his speed was unmatched. If he had intended to hit something, and there was something there to hit, he would have hit it. Tayuya once again joined him on the branch, this time followed by Fu, who looked up at him with worry. Is everything okay, Onisan? He smiled as convincingly as he could, pushing his current worries to the back of his mind for now. It's nothing, Imuoto, just thought I saw something is all. Fu nodded with a frown, knowing that her brother wasn't the type to see things or react without reason. Huh. Finally losing your marbles, shithead. Naruto sent Tayuya a cheeky grin as Gaara and Matsuri joined them. It's more surprising it didn't happen sooner. He got a laugh from Tayuya as Gaara looked around, trying to see what it was that had Naruto so agitated. Yes, even so it would be probably wise to start setting up camp. We are all tired and as time passes we are more likely to make mistakes. Everybody just nodded, even Naruto surprisingly. He was usually the last to admit he needed to stop. Maybe he was just tired. Naruto had to go with that. It at least meant he wasn't crazy, paranoid or seeing things. He didn't particularly like the idea of turning into the generic idea of what people thought a Jinchuriki to be. They pulled over as soon as they found a suitable clearing, setting up the tents as quickly as they could. Most would think it strange that the Kazekage would be content, actually more than they would think, with sleeping out in a mere tent. In actuality it always brought him back to the simpler days of his younger shinobi career when it was just him, Tayuya and Naruto. Of course back then he was mostly alone in the tent as those two were always snuggled up together. Honestly, sometimes he just couldn't understand why it had taken so long for them to get together. Naruto offered to take the watch that night. Like Fu, he really didn't have to sleep all that long, it was just how his body was programmed. However, just because he didn't have to didn't mean he couldn't enjoy a good lie-in, especially with his red bundle of comfort sleeping next to him. He smiled at the thought as he glanced around at the warmly lit tent where he was certain Tayuya was already fast asleep. She had once tried to stay up with him as a sort of romantic gesture. It didn't really turn out all that great. She was asleep in his arms after 10 minutes. He returned his attention to the forest around them. There were a few shadow clones nearby that would dispel if anybody came too close, warning him. He was waiting for a good hour before one of them did just that, the flood of memories shocking him out of the semi-lucid state he always had while guarding. In the eye of his clone he saw that familiar flash of orange and black as his mouth turned into a frown. It was on the very outskirts of the border he had set up, so he tried to ignore it, hoping it was nothing. However, less than a minute later another clone dispelled, this time on the other side of the camp. Again he saw that same blur of orange and black. Fearing that they were surrounded as it would take incredible speed for one man to reach both ends of his perimeter, he stood up, reaching out with what senses he could for the intruders. He felt nothing, which put him on serious high alert. It was impossible to put his clones under a genjutsu. That much he knew for certain with Tayuya's help, so there was definitely something out there, something he couldn't sense. Hi there. Naruto spun around as fast as his body would let him, rather giving him the appearance of facing one way in 1 second and the opposite way in another without moving. He immediately scowled as he stared at the damned spiral mask of Toby. He immediately launched more than a fair few kunai at the man. He continued to stare with critical eyes as the kunai passed right through him, leaving the masked man rather nonplussed. The same thing had happened at the cage meeting, so he wasn't all that surprised, more annoyed. That wasn't very nice, and when Toby came to say hello as well. Naruto continued to stare at him with narrowed eyes, analyzing anything he could about him. His first instinct was that this was a normal clone, however they weren't able to speak and he could lightly smell them. This man, on the other hand, he didn't exist, at least, that would be what he would believe if his eyes weren't showing him exactly this. What do you want? He kept his voice neutral, not wanting to set up a fight when he still knew so little about him or his abilities. For the Akatsuki to either be considering him or have actually let him in, he must be powerful. That strange intangibility and his near invisibility to his senses would have told him that anyway. Toby for his part just cocked a head to the side, much like a dog, and flopped to the floor, surprising the blonde at the almost childish display of immaturity. Toby wants to talk with Namikaze-sama. Naruto's eyes narrowed even further. If that was possible, he wondered how the man had known about his heritage so soon when only the cage were privy to that information. He had also mentioned something about his father before, possibly using the Hiraishin on him. The fact he was still here today only spoke more of his danger. Who are you? He didn't know how, but he somehow could tell that Toby was smiling under his mask, goofily too. I'm Toby, the bestest Akatsuki member ever. Except for leader Sama, of course. Naruto, though wary, decided that the man in front of him currently posed no harm. It wasn't like he could attack him anyway, and if the masked man tried anything, he had a few Fuijin no Iki seals dotted around the area. He carefully sat down on the floor, a good 15 feet from the robed man in front of him, earning him another concealed smile. So what did you want to talk about? Toby was staring almost absently off into the trees, apparently watching a fly that had flown too close to his head before turning to Naruto's voice. Toby was bored. Nobody in the Akatsuki is any fun. Zetsu-senpai is always grumpy, except for White Zetsu. He's fun sometimes. Konan-chan is quiet, very quiet, like talking to a piece of paper. He suddenly erupted into a fit of giggles at his own little joke as he rolled back on the floor, laughing madly. Naruto casually threw a kunai at him, watching as it passed right through the man like nothing. Toby didn't even seem to notice that Naruto had tried to take advantage of a possibly vulnerable moment. He sat back up, looking like he was wiping tears from his eyes, even though he had a mask on his face blocking him from doing just that. He looked around again, then down at the kunai behind him before back to the blonde, seemingly unconcerned. Naruto just shrugged before leaning back on his own hands, although his body was still tense to react to anything. So what about your leader? He had to ask, more because he hated not knowing anything about his enemy or possibly his opponent one day. That would be telling, and Zetsu-senpai always tells Toby that telling is bad for the Akatsuki. Naruto sighed. The childish way the man spoke was starting to grate on his nerves a bit. He wasn't saying that the cold demeanor of his usual opponents was better though. What Akatsuki? You only have 4 members left, or haven't you noticed? He raised up his hands for a moment, clearly displaying the rings that still adorned his fingers. He had at first only intended it as a type of threat, but he had actually found that removing the rings proved exceptionally difficult. He knew it was possible. Itachi had done it after all, but it wasn't a major concern for now and would deal with it later. Toby still held that invisible grin as he only casually looked over the rings, before his own bare hands. Toby still thinks stealing is wrong, Namikaze-san. It means that Toby doesn't get a ring unless we go get the one Snaky Man stole as well. And you miscounted, Leader Sama is way more powerful than us, he's worth like 6 people. He once again burst into a fit of laughter, apparently at some kind of inside joke only he was privy to. Naruto filed away the information that Orochimaru had one of the Akatsuki rings for later, intending to bring it up with Jiraiya when or if he next saw him. Namikaze-san looks just like his dad, except for those whiskers. Naruto narrowed his eyes again. He didn't like the way Toby just casually talked about his father. What do you know about my father? Toby bounced to his feet, surprising Naruto, who was up in a flash, kunai in hand as he relaxed into a fighting stance. Toby simply waved merrily as the air around him began to warp strangely. Sorry Namikaze-san, maybe another time. The strange vortex that formed around him proceeded to consume his body until just his eye was left, then it too vanished. However, Naruto could only smirk. Right at the end, as the man was disappearing, he smelled him. It was fleeting and may have been anything, but he was certain he could smell the man right before he activated that strange technique. 4 minutes, 42 seconds. Ha! Naruto spun only to see Tayuya blearily rubbing her eyes as she walked over. What's 4 minutes and 42 seconds? Naruto just waved a hand before he wrapped an arm around her shoulder, noticing her slight shiver from the cold air. Nothing, just an idea I had. He wasn't sure why, but he felt that keeping his and Toby's brief conversation quiet was best for now. Tayuya just observed him strangely but didn't say anything, too tired to care. Come on shithead, Matsuri has the next watch and I missed my pillow. He just nodded before letting her lead him by the arm with a smile. He sent one last curious look out into the forest before his attentions were filled by flawless skin and vibrant red hair. The next day continued much in the same way. The three of them would travel through fire country at a sedate pace, for shinobi anyway, while chatting idly. However, whenever Naruto would separate from the group for whatever reason, scouting or needed to the toilet or anything else, he would get a friendly visit from Toby. In every case he never sensed or felt the man approaching, he would simply appear before him. Likewise in every case the man would just talk into his ear inanely while never actually revealing anything remotely useful about the Akatsuki. Despite the seemingly moronic mask he wore, and not the literal one, he proved to actually be quite cunning, subverting or diverting all of Naruto's questions with more inane ramblings. It led Naruto to believe that Toby was actually hiding something. Well, he obviously was being in the Akatsuki, but he thought it was more in the way he had been acting. It just didn't add up. Whenever they would talk he would play the fool. However, despite Naruto being unable to see his eye, he could still feel the man sizing him up. Naruto didn't let anything slip about his abilities, even though he already believed Akatsuki knew most of it anyway. However, the idea that this man could be around him without Naruto even realizing worried him. At least one good thing came from their chats, apart from the slight amusement Naruto would get from his sometimes overly idiotic moves. Their conversations never lasted longer than 5 minutes. Naruto counted each time, even when Naruto gave the man the opportunity to talk longer. It reinforced his earlier assumption the man could only keep up his odd intangibility for so long, and that would be useful information. Likewise, every time the man would leave via that strange vortex-like ability, he would suddenly appear in Naruto's senses again, also leading him to believe he had to become tangible to activate it. Toby didn't even realize just how much he was giving away to Naruto, but like many of his previous enemies he would come to regret underestimating his shrewdness. They were jumping through the trees, Naruto and Tayuya taking up the rear while both were usually quiet to one another. Naruto was thinking about the latest challenge Toby posed while Tayuya was wondering why Naruto seemed quite distant since yesterday. He would talk when asked anything, in his usual carefree way, but he wasn't starting any conversation like he usually did. Hey Tayuya. Hey, surprise must have been evident as he smirked when he turned to look at her. What? Naruto kept hopping over a few branches as they ran, thinking of the right way to phrase it. How would you fight somebody who could turn themselves completely intangible, but could only do it for a certain amount of time? Tayuya looked at him strangely, wondering where this had come from all of a sudden. However, she pondered the question nonetheless. I guess I would force them into a situation where they would have to maintain it for longer, then when they came out I could deal some damage. Naruto frowned and nodded absently, apparently returning to his own musings. He had thought the same thing. Why? Naruto seemed to ignore her, instead countering her question with another. What do you know about the other member of the Akatsuki, Toby? Tayuya again looked at him strangely, narrowing her eyes in confusion at the strange questions. Not a lot. He would mostly stick near Zetsu or Deodara before he bit the big one. I didn't really see any of his abilities and I never got a good look at his face because of the mask he always wore. Naruto nodded again, his frown deepening as he turned his attention back to the path through the branches ahead. Why? Did something happen, Naruto? He waved a hand, warding off her question with the gesture. It's nothing important. Tayuya scowled as she suddenly leapt ahead of him, blocking his path as she looked him right in the eyes. Hey shithead, what did we say about you blocking me out? Something obviously fucking happened or you would be asking these weird-ass questions. Naruto stopped in front of her, his features going from neutral to guarded before settling on resigned. Okay, I'm sorry Tayuya, but for some reason I just thought it would be best not to say anything. Tayuya cocked her head in confusion but waited for him to continue. Yesterday, when I was out on guard, Toby appeared next to me. Tayuya raised an eyebrow, wondering why either Naruto or Toby weren't dead already, but as he continued to explain what happened, her face switched from intrigue to surprise to confusion before finally a simple frown. How can somebody just make their body intangible and why wouldn't they just sink through the floor? Naruto raised his eyebrows, he honestly hadn't considered that. His first reaction was that the ability somehow kept him levitated, but Toby walked like he was real, he even fell to the ground. I have no idea. Tayuya's frown deepened like Naruto's had earlier as they both tried to puzzle out the enigma that was Toby. Quickly they realized the group had moved ahead and put on a burst of speed to catch up, both of them now lost in thought. Mainly about how to beat an enemy you couldn't even touch. The Suna gates were a welcome sight to everybody that had taken the hostile journey through the desert. While for them it was easier than for most, it was still a harsh and bleak environment to travel through, usually stamping out most conversations. Tayuya sometimes joked that it was because the ice didn't need breaking, it was already vapor. While Naruto's smaller wind jutsu were useful for warding off the heat, nothing beat entering the shadow of the mighty walls, and everybody, no exceptions, sighed in relief. They all started to part at the gate, but Gaara quickly put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Can I speak to you in my office, please? Naruto suddenly had the greatest sense of déjà vu ever as he remembered his academy days but shrugged it off. He looked at Tayuya, who seemed a little annoyed that their alone time would have to be delayed, but she shrugged and sighed. Come on Fu, I'm going to show you the best dango place in all of Suna. The younger girl just smiled as Tayuya walked off with her, hand in hand. The redhead looked back over her shoulder at Naruto before giving him a cheeky wink and returning her attention to the younger girl at her side. Naruto smiled at the scene before looking over at Gaara. What did you want to talk about? Gaara shook his head and started walking back to the Kazekage Tower. He was certain there would be a pile of paperwork the size of him waiting on his desk, but it could wait a little bit. That was what shadow clones were for in his opinion. Not here, in my office. Naruto just shrugged and grabbed Gaara by the shoulder before the sand wielder felt an odd tingling sensation and they both disappeared from view. When they flashed into Gaara's office courtesy of the seal Naruto had left there, he just looked around curiously with his brow raised questioningly. Fascinating, when did you place a seal in here? Naruto just shrugged, he couldn't honestly remember, only that he knew where each seal he placed was. Gaara looked around and sure enough there was an enormous pile of loose papers and documents waiting for him on his desk, as if mocking him. With a sigh he put his hands in a seal, letting the other 3 Gaara clones he summoned take care of it before he got annoyed and decided to shred it with a whole lot of sand. He moved over, sitting behind his desk as he sighed into the comfortable leather, earning a scowl from Naruto, knowing Gaara only did it to annoy him. After all, it had once been his aspiration to be the Hokage, as likely as that was now, which it wasn't. So what did you want to talk about? Gaara just nodded, his face turning to what Naruto had dubbed Kazekage mode. There wasn't that much of a shift in his attitude, but he held an overall greater sense of importance and power, as well as seriousness. He casually reached into a drawer in his desk and removed a Junin flak jacket before casually tossing it over to Naruto. The blonde just stared at it for a moment incredulously before narrowing his eyes at his longtime friend. What's this? Gaara let up on his mask for a moment to let slip a small smile. You earned it. I know you didn't take the Junin exams but consider it a field promotion. I am allowed to give those. He looked thoughtful for a minute. I think. Naruto's sweat dropped as he continued to stare at the jacket questioningly. I believe it only qualifies under extenuating circumstances. However, I believe that the successful incapacitation of numerous S-ranked criminals, as well as the fact you are a Jinchuriki and have mastered 3 S-ranked jutsu counts. Naruto still didn't seem to be sure, and Gaara only sighed as he leant forward in the desk. Naruto, at 16 this would also make you the youngest Junin to ever be produced in the village hidden in the sand, as well as the youngest ever promoted in peacetime in all the elemental nations. Naruto seemed to perk up at that as he stared at the flak jacket, unable to tear his eyes away from it. But, what if I'm not ready, or if I don't deserve it? Gaara could only smile at that. Naruto really was too humble for his own good. Don't you think as Kazekage that decision is up to me? If I say you deserve it then you do, understand? He had hardened his voice, becoming every bit the Kazekage that almost 3 years with the job had made him into. Naruto subconsciously stood a little straighter, finally tearing his eyes from the dark brown jacket to look his friend in the eye with a weak smile. Thank you Kazekage-sama. Gaara scowled at the name but he let it slide, knowing that Naruto was uncertain right now. Anyway, imagine how jealous Tayuya is going to feel. Naruto smirked at this as a shit-eating grin made its way onto his face as he quickly shrugged off his coat, followed by the Chunin flak jacket underneath it. He held the Junin jacket hesitantly for another moment before almost reverently pulling it on, startled at how much more comfortable it was than its lower-ranking counterpart. Finally he slipped his coat back on. On the outside his appearance didn't change all that much. He was standing taller and he now seemed to exude an air of confidence. Now I should inform you that with the rank of Junin you have new responsibilities. Naruto would have groaned at that word but he was still rather caught up in the promotion to complain. You are now eligible to take on solo A-ranked missions as well as an S-ranked one with a team. You are also now able to apply for the Anbu and all the perks that come with the position, although I would advise waiting until you have more experience with some missions. He smirked a little as he looked his friend right in the eye. You are also now obligated to take on a genin team or an apprentice as their Junin sensei within a year. Unless we enter war, then you will be forced to take him on sooner. Naruto frowned. He still had so much in his life to sort out before he could start thinking about training others. Then again he had trained Fu and she was technically still a genin. Maybe he could just take her on as an apprentice. Then again she would probably enter the Chunin exams that were coming up, so he threw that plan out of the window. What about the Akatsuki, or Orochimaru? Gaara sighed. He knew Naruto's life was, in a word, a mess right now, but those were the rules and responsibilities that came with the rank. Like I said, you have a year to get acquainted with your rank and responsibilities. Hopefully you will be better prepared by then. Naruto just nodded with a frown before his face lit up. Well then, I gotta go tell Tayuya, she's gonna be so jealous. With that he promptly vanished from the room, which might have shocked Gaara if he hadn't known Naruto for as long as he had. He swiveled on his chair, looking out at his village as the afternoon sun made the sand sparkle. He eased his face into a smile as he thought about everything that was to come before the speaker on his desk blared to life. Kazekage-sama, now that you're back you have a meeting with the education representative and a full report waiting for you from the Anbu captain. You also have to talk to the zoning commission about your suggested extensions to the village. After that, Gaara sighed deeply as he let his head drop to the desk. He already missed fighting S-ranked shinobi. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.